I welcome you to today's session of Massive Open Online course on International Economics. Today, we will discuss module number 11. The focal point of this module is role of supply and demand in Ricardian model. You can see from the title that it is going to talk about the effect, the influence, or the idea of supply and demand in determining the pattern and the basis of trade in Ricardian model. Students, you remember that in module number 9 and 10, we also talked about the Ricardian model, but from a slightly different perspective. What was the basis of Ricardian model? That was comparative cost advantage. We talked about that. Whether the Ricardian model kind of analysis ends up with gains from trade, we also talked about that. And apart from today's module number 11, in module number 12, so coming module, we also discuss some implications of Ricardian idea, and we introduce the Ricardian demand, supply, and the world supply function, which is very important. But before that, we need to know, even in case of domestic demand and supply, whether Ricardo has something to do or domestic demand and supply has something to do with the Ricardo. With the Ricardo means in determining the autarkic equilibrium price or price ratio if we follow the Ricardian principle. So that is precisely the focal point of today's talk. In brief, today's talk is going to cover the following things. We will again introduce the Ricardian theory of comparative cost advantage, but I am not going to go into the details of the comparative cost advantage, as you already know the details of this thing. And of course, while doing this thing, we have to touch upon the comparative cost advantage, but I am not going to spend much time on that. Then, very briefly, we will go through the equilibrium for both the trading partners, and both the trading partners means home and the foreign. The individual PPF, individual CIC for both home and foreign. And then comes the main issue. Main issue is the demand and supply curve for the foreign, home together. And then what kind of influence this demand and supply is going to have in determining the equilibrium price. Equilibrium price means I am not talking about post-trade equilibrium price. My focus is on pre-trade or autarkic, the domestic equilibrium price for both the countries together. Together means, first of all, we will check separately and then together what is going to happen to the price ratio. Whether the price ratio are same for both these countries or different. If different, then what is going to happen? I will just hint at those issues because that issue will be covered in more detail in coming modules. And then the world market for a particular commodity. In my lecture today, I will focus on one commodity, X. But of course, you can have both X and Y together or Y separately. But both X and Y together will be discussed in the next module. That means the world supply curve. And then, as you know, at the end, we will summarize today's lecture. So the introduction of Ricardian theory and the comparative cost advantage, that I said that this is going to be the starting point of today's lecture. This comparative cost advantage, as you know, it is a refined version of the absolute cost advantage theory. So where absolute cost advantage theory fails, the Ricardian idea of comparative cost advantage theory comes up with a possible explanation to trade. Why SCA theory fails? Because if it happens that one country emerges as efficient in all lines of production, then absolute cost advantage theory says that that country should produce everything, the other country should not produce anything. But the real world is that every country is producing some goods. So why? That has been explained in comparative cost advantage principle developed by David Ricardo. So Ricardo stated a theorem that other things being equal, a country tends to specialize. Mind it, students, this is the Ricardian theory of trade. So a country tends to specialize in and export those commodities. Be specific, be minute, be attentive here. the country is going to export those commodities in the production of which it has maximum comparative cost advantage. So it is not only comparative cost advantage, it is the maximum of comparative cost advantage or minimum of comparative cost disadvantage. This is the thing I have been saying time and again and repeatedly, that less inefficient is also a kind of efficiency. So if I can go for efficiency, means the maximum efficient is the maximum thing that I can get. If I cannot go for efficiency, then I may go for less inefficiency because I am less bad. Means, in a sense, I am a relatively good. So this is the idea of comparative cost advantage principle. So similarly, countries' import will be of goods having relatively less comparative cost advantage or greater disadvantage. So this advantage and disadvantage should be used more judiciously and more cleverly, because advantage is going to give you your efficiency and less disadvantage is also going to give you efficiency, because less inefficiency is efficiency. This theory is called the Ricardian theory of trade. So a country has a comparative cost advantage in producing a good if the opportunity cost of producing that good in terms of the other good is lower in that country than it is in another country. If you remember that the opportunity cost of a production of a good is how much of another good we are going to sacrifice in order to produce one more unit of another good. So if that is compared between two goods, say how much of Y needs to be sacrificed to get one more unit of X, or how much X is going to be sacrificed to get one more unit of Y. So this is one comparison. Now you plug this comparison into a different framework. What is the different framework? How much Y I am going to sacrifice in order to get one more unit of X in country A. And the same story or same thing means how much Y is going to be sacrificed to produce one more unit of X in country B. Now compare between these two things. Compare between these two sacrifices, quote unquote. This is nothing but the comparative cost advantage. So if it is less, you go for it. If it is more, don't go for it. So that's the idea. So relative cost advantage theory attributed that the cause and benefits of international trade to the differences in the relative opportunity costs. Costs in terms of other goods given up. This is the concept of opportunity cost. This is what I said in producing the goods or the same goods among various countries. And the main criterion in trade is comparative advantage. There may be one country, that is more productive at producing most or even all goods compared to another. But the relative cost advantage or the disadvantage is important for trade, because this relative idea actually is a refinement of cost advantage principle over the absolute cost advantage theory. And as I said again, and time and again, and I will also say this thing repeatedly, that Ricardian idea of comparative cost advantage theory is perhaps the most influential and the most significant theory of international trade till date. Till date means a lot of developments that have been taken place, but still the essence of comparative cost advantage theory is intact. So no one can refute the idea of comparative cost advantage theory. And in analyzing this role of supply and demand in Ricardian theory, we essentially assume a few things that are very standard. But one thing I want to mention here specifically is that the free trade is considered here, means there is no restriction, neither tariff, neither quota, or kind of, transportation cost is also assumed to be zero here, which may not be a very realistic phenomenon, but, we have used it here for the fact that if we use this positive transportation cost, that is not going to influence the essence of Ricardian theory much, because the main result or the basic essence of Ricardian theory will remain as it is. Now, coming to the PPF and CIC for both home and foreign. For the time being, my left panel talks about the home. As you know, the production possibility frontier tells us what? Tells us how much of X and Y that I can produce by using whatever amount of factors I have. In Ricardian theory, it is based on only one factor. So in that sense, it is based on the labor theory of value. The labor theory of value says that the value of a good or the price of a good or the cost of production of a good depends on how much labor is used to produce 1 unit of that commodity. And both home and foreign, these two countries are endowed with only one factor, and the factor is labor. If labor is allocated between X and Y, you can produce 1,000 combinations of X and Y, starting from 0x and 0y. If 0x is produced, this means that the entire labor force is used to produce only Y. If 0y is produced, the entire labor force is used to produce only X. So this line here on the vertical axis, if you students look at the diagram on the left panel, and on the vertical axis, this point gives you what maximum amount of Y that I can produce. Maximum amount of Y that I can produce depends on two things. One, how many labors I have, and how many labor units are required to produce 1 unit of the good. This ALY, students, if you look at this thing very carefully, the denominator is ALY. This ALY says how much labor is required to produce 1 unit of Y. Say it is 10. If 10 labors are used to produce 1 unit of Y and I have 100 units of labor in my country as endowment, then how many Y I can produce? 100 divided by 10, because 10 labors are used to produce 1 unit of Y. So this vertical intercept here from 0 to this point is defining the maximum amount of Y that could be produced at home. And similarly, on the horizontal axis, this ALX gives us what? ALX gives us how much labor is required to produce 1 unit of X. If it is 5 and total labor endowment is 100 as it was before, then total amount of X that I can produce is 100 by 5. So 20 units of X I can produce. Now students, if I ask you one thing, and that is very rudimentary at this point of time, is that, ALY, I assume that ALY is 10 and ALX is 5. So if I say this thing, what idea you get from this? That in case of X production, it seems that this country is efficient, because in X production, country requires less labor. But that is a very partial picture that I am going to give, because if X is a mango and Y is a computer, then it is quite natural that one mango requires not more than one labor, but one computer definitely requires thousands, it could be 100 labors. So that is not a direct comparison that has been used in absolute cost advantage theory of Adam Smith. So now you need to compare this with what is happening in the foreign economy. Similarly, in the right panel, you have similar diagram, that is PPF, that is on the vertical axis I am measuring the maximum amount of Y that foreign can produce by using the endowment of labor, and maximum amount of X that could be produced by the foreign by using the endowment of labor. Now, if you look at these two PPFs very carefully, students, one is flatter. Flatter PPF means that here labor requirement in X at home is relatively less, whereas labor requirement in Y at foreign is relatively less. Therefore, the PPF is steeper at foreign. Now, this PPF means, as you know, production is supply. So PPF is nothing but the main reason behind the supply curve. So once you know the PPF, then you got an idea about the supply. But I will come to that issue of supply in a minute, because I need to introduce a few more things, then I can explain this thing. Now, with these two PPFs, I can superimpose the community indifference curve. The community indifference curve for home and foreign. Here the community indifference curve of the home economy is tangent with the home PPF at point B, giving me the production and the consumption equilibrium. Means I am not into trade. Without going into trade, my equilibrium demand is this much of x and this much of y. This much of x and this much of y. And that is produced here at this point. Similarly, the foreign equilibrium is at point A. And mind it, these two indifference curves are community indifference curve for both these two countries separately. This is home community indifference curve. This is foreign community indifference curve. And the foreign equilibrium, consumption equilibrium and production equilibrium, mind it, this is pre-trade, autarkic. Autarkic equilibrium takes place at point A. And then I get to know about the supply from the PPF and the demand from the community indifference curve. And as I promised that, I need to focus on role of supply and demand in Ricardo. And I will now explain the role of supply and demand in Ricardo. Now students, let's come to the most interesting part of today's lecture. What I said is that the role of supply and demand in Ricardo. Now from PPF, as I said, this is going to give us the reflection of the supply curve. Now students, look at the PPF separately for the home country. This home country's PPF is flat relatively, and I'm not repeating it. The slope of this PPF should be exactly equal to ALX by ALY because it is height by base. So if it is the case, then it should be this by this. Therefore, ALX by ALY is the slope of the PPF. Now this ALX by ALY, what is that? It is the factor requirement to produce X and factor requirement to produce Y. And what is the factor? The factor is labor. What I said in my previous example, that ALX is say 5 and ALY say 10. So ALX by ALY is 5 by 10. Hold on for a moment. If ALX is 5 and the wage rate is 10, then how much money is required to produce 1 unit of X? This is equal to ALX, which is 5, multiplied by the wage rate, which is 10. So 50 is the cost of producing 1 unit of X. And the wage rate is 10 and ALY is 10. So 100 is the cost to produce 1 unit of Y. And as you know, students, cost is equal to the price. So if cost is equal to the price, then the price of X should be 50 and price of Y should be 100. Now keep this thing aside. Now ALX into W by ALY into W gives me PX by PY. Now look at the left hand side, cancel out W. What is left is ALX by ALY. So that is essentially 50 by 100. So price of X is 50. If for some reason I see that the price that I am going to get in the market is less than 50, should I produce X or not? If the price is less than 50, if the price is unable to cover the cost to produce X, I should not produce X. Rather, I should produce Y. So that's the main driving force behind deriving the supply curve in Ricardian structure. So this ALX by ALY is the slope of the PPF, means this is the price ratio. If the price ratio for some reason is greater than this, then I will produce X. If it is not, then I will produce Y. So if for some reason the price ratio is greater than ALX by ALY, then what I am going to do? I am going to produce greater price ratio, means it is steeper. And when it is greater, what I said? Px is greater than the cost of producing X. So if the price ratio is like this, my production equilibrium will be here, means only X is going to be produced. If X is going to be produced, no Y is produced, so X by Y is something by 0. And you know the value of something by 0, it is infinite. On the other hand, if price of X by price of Y is less than ALX by ALY, what you are going to do? You are going to produce 0X. All the labor force, entire endowment is going to be used to produce only Y. So X by Y is 0 by something. So 0 by positive value is 0. So when ALX by ALY, which is essentially equal to price of X by price of Y, is less than the slope of this ALX by ALY, means the PPF, then I am here in this diagram. And here in this diagram means all through this segment, my X by Y is 0. X by Y is 0 means X is 0, Y is something. So whatever happens to Y, that does not matter, but X has to be 0. And after that, you can produce anywhere along this PPF. So one thing is that you are here and then you are here, and then you can go infinite in this way or can this way. So the point of interest here is that if this is the shape of your PPF, then the supply curve should be like this one, or to be more precise, your supply curve should be like this and this. Now students, come to the most interesting part. If this is the supply curve and you have various community indifference curve defining your demand pattern, if the demand patterns are different apart from this dx by dy shown in the diagram, will it going to have any effect on the equilibrium price? Because equilibrium price, as you know, is equal to ALX by ALY. Say this is not the demand curve, or say let us start from this is the demand curve. And how the equilibrium price is determined? Where demand is equal to supply, or the demand supply curve intersects each other. At this diagram, in this diagram, at this point, the demand and supply are equal. Therefore, the equilibrium price is this. This is true for this demand curve. Now, if the demand goes up, what we know? If the demand goes up, then price should increase. Let's see what happens here. So the demand is no longer this thing. Rather, the demand is higher. If the demand is higher, my demand curve is like this one. If that is the case, my equilibrium point shifts from this point to this point. Because the equilibrium point is shifting from this point to this point, what is happening? My equilibrium output of X by Y is changing, but not the price. If the demand is less, the demand curve is this. Still your output equilibrium is changing, but not the equilibrium price. Very interesting is that demand has no role in determining the equilibrium price in Ricardian model. The equilibrium price or equilibrium price ratio is entirely determined by the supply side or the supply curve. And here the supply curve is coming from the PPF. And the slope of the PPF is the equilibrium price ratio irrespective of your demand curve. That is why it is called, or it is said that the Ricardian model is a supply side model, because demand cannot change the equilibrium price. If there is any change in supply, the equilibrium price will change. Then what demand can change? Demand can change only the output. So this gives you something else, that if you want to produce more, then you can produce more. Whether that is consistent with equilibrium assumption of full employment or not, that is altogether a different question. But here, because of this thing, because this Ricardian idea is a classical model. In macroeconomics, we also got to know about the classical idea. Classical idea, the curve is fixed at the full employment level. Now, if the changes takes place, whatever changes takes place here, the output remains same. This is one kind of argument. But here in the Ricardian structure of comparative cost advantage principle, the supply is giving you determination of price, which is stuck for the some time being. Because as long as the slope of the PPF is not changing, your equilibrium price is not going to change. And this equilibrium price, which is a function of the slope of the PPF, is nothing but the reflection of the technology that has been used to produce X and Y. And what is the technology here? Technology defines the requirement of labor to produce 1 unit of X or 1 unit of Y. So 1 unit of Y requires ALY, 1 unit of X requires ALX. So this is determined by the technology. So in Ricardian model, technology determines the equilibrium price, not the demand. So supply determines the equilibrium price, not the demand. So the role of demand is insignificant, rather irrelevant in determining the equilibrium price here. So if we follow the same principle, then you can have the idea for the foreign economy as well. But the only difference is that since the foreign's PPF is taper, the equilibrium autarkic price ratio for the foreign economy is higher compared to the domestic economy or the home economy. If you look at the diagram here, the right hand panel is giving you the equilibrium autarkic price for the foreign economy, and in our previous case, the equilibrium autarkic price for the home economy was this, which is much lower. Now, let's go to this thing that both in the foreign economy and the home economy, demand is not influencing the equilibrium price. So, for all these demands, the equilibrium price for the home is stuck here, and for all these demands in the foreign economy, the equilibrium price is stuck here. So, the autarkic equilibrium price is here at home, and the autarkic equilibrium price is here at foreign. Now, if I go for, clubbing these two countries together and to look at the supply of X only, not the supply of X by Y. The supply of X by is going to be discussed in our next module when we will talk about the relative world supply, that is X by Y. So, the supply function is like this one. What is the implication of that one? So, let us differentiate or bifurcate the diagram and drawing an origin here. So, this part of the diagram is for the home economy, and for the home economy, the supply curve was this. Very quickly, if you see, the supply curve was this for the home economy. Now, the supply curve is this. Now, once the home economy is exhausted, because home economy is the most efficient economy to produce X, because the requirement of labor was much less in home economy. So, once it is exhausted, then the foreign economy comes in. Now, the foreign economy starts producing X. So, total X production should be equal to the sum of X produced by home and the X produced by foreign. So, till this point, the total amount of X produced by home is L bar by ALX. You remember the first diagram that I showed. And then it is the axis of the foreign economy. And for this thing, the equilibrium autarkic price, if we remember, it is much higher compared to the home economy, which is here. And now the supply curve for the foreign economy is like this. And in our diagram, the supply curve of the foreign economy is like this. And beyond that point, it is fixed here. So that is X is fixed here. So total amount of X is this produced by home and this much produced by foreign. Now, you look, if the demand changes, then here, as long as the demand passes through this segment, no change takes place in the price. As long as the demand passes through this segment, no change takes place in the price. And these two lines are the autarkic equilibrium lines. The only segment where change in demand can have some effect on equilibrium price is for this vertical segment. But this vertical segment is non-existent when there is no trade. So, this vertical segment comes into play when there is trade. So, in Ricardian model, in pre-trade situation, demand has no role to play. But in post-trade situation, demand may change equilibrium price if we are on this segment. And this segment means both the countries are completely specializing. With this note, we come to the end of this module, and the basic thing or the takeaway of this module is that demand cannot determine equilibrium price in Ricardian model. The equilibrium autarkic price is determined only and solely by the supply curve or the technology or the production possibility curve of the countries. Thank you, students.